All right, welcome to the October 2023 edition of Disability Ministry Video Roundtable from Key Ministry. My name is Beth Golick, and in a little bit we'll be joined by my colleague, Catherine Boyle. But today's conversation is on navigating puberty in disability ministry. So let me preface this by saying how this topic came to be. So Key Ministry hosts a monthly roundtable such as this called Idea Share, where ministry leaders, and y'all are invited, can come on and we just talk about whatever's going on in our ministry. So it's a time of encouragement, it's a time to brainstorm, and all different kinds of topics come up. And this was one of them that came up. And I honestly, and I'm looking around to see if anybody remembers, I can't remember why it came up. There must have been a particular situation that somebody was dealing with, and I honestly can't remember the specifics. But anyway, so we said, you know what, let's make this let's devote a whole roundtable to it. So here we are. So this is not a webinar. This is not me talking at you. This is my job is just to facilitate the conversation. So I'm going to open it up. Does anybody have something they'd like to share, like a situation or a question, like, you know, what brought you to our discussion today? So go ahead. I'll just give everybody a chance to unmute if you want, or raise your hand and address the group. It's gonna be a really short roundtable, people. Okay, Lily.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak up. The reason I'm here, I don't lead in this area, but I do have a son who's 14, who is he's not yet in the student ministry. He's actually still part of the children's ministry. We're trying to get that started. We have a very large church and stuff moves super slow, change. And so I guess I just wanted to hear some tips on how to help the volunteers that are helping my son navigate things that happen, you know, with him while he's at church. So.
All right, thank you for opening it up. So I'm hearing a couple different things here. So first of all, the frustration of things take longer at large churches sometimes, yes. And I saw a couple head nods going on with that one. So apparently you're in good company. We have a couple different things that we could talk about here. So one is transitioning our teens who are age-wise, it's no longer appropriate for them to be in the children's ministry area. And so kind of what's next, and how can we prepare the students, and how can we prepare our youth ministry leaders? So I think this is a great place to start. So does anybody have any advice or experience that they want to share addressing that transition of a young adult or teen from the children's ministry area to the student or the youth ministry area?
I'll just kind of say our kids just walk down the hall. So it's not like there's a whole big transition. We know that when we see them needing a little bit more, and they're ready to give a little bit more input into the Sunday school lesson or the activities that are going on, then we speak to the parents and talk to them about their spiritual goals and spiritual formations that they want, and can we achieve those goals by moving them to the next. Some of them don't want to go. I have one young man who is not a young man, he's like 15, I think now. He tells his mom every Sunday when he comes, I don't want to go. I'm not ready yet. I'm just not ready yet. And that's okay, because again, it's a walk down the hall. We also have a social skills group that meets once a month that kind of help them get into that transition of what's happening. And the main, and this is another topic to be discussed, about what happens to them when they start the puberty experience for parents. That's the biggest thing. And just having those conversations with parents who very willingly say, we're not ready to go there with them. And I'm like, I don't care whether you're ready or not. Their body is saying we're ready for that. So it's having those conversations.
So Sylvia, am I hearing that you or your church is facilitating those conversations with parents?
When I notice some behaviors going on in the Sunday school class, I will, when the parents come to pick them up, I will say, have you noticed XYZ?
Okay.
And they will say, yeah, but I'm not ready for that. And I'm like, again,
Too bad.
so be it. It's like Christmas. It's going to come, whether you're ready or not. And then, we, like I said, we have a social skills group. So then I know that that's when it's time to try to make that transition, to have them, go to the next class so that they are ready for that particular Sunday when we have the social skills group with one of our male team leads that can, we talk about, okay, it's time to have this conversation with them, and talk to parents about what is it that you want them to know.
Mm-hmm.
How far do we go with the conversation? And then let some of the youth and young adults that are in that group kind of encourage and reinforce that conversation.
Okay. So it is like you do kind of partner with parents in that and help resource them a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. I know we're going to be coming back to Sylvia for more, but Kathy has her hand raised.
I would just say, Lily, I'm the special needs minister at the church where I'm at. And so I'm over preschoolers all the way through adults with special needs. And communication is always best for us. And anytime that I've dealt with a parent such as yourself, where that child is in puberty, that teen is in puberty, communicating things that you might be seeing at home as they're transitioning into that different group. Now, we're fortunate that we have a teen-specific room for teens with special needs and with disabilities, but some of them with that inclusion or with our tier system, they are going over to student ministry and sitting at their table groups or their life groups. And so I work really closely with our next gen team or our student team and find just the right leader to sit down and say, hey, here are some of the incredible things about, let's say it's Bob. Here's some great things about Bob. Here's what he's able to do. Here's some awesome things. Always start with a positive. And then I say, and then here's just some challenges. Here's what we're working on through our Special Friends program. And that communication to that table group leader. And it's pretty incredible when that group of students surrounds Bob and now understands. And granted, we're not going to tell, the peers about anything that might be very private. But now when they're in our suite and when they're within our area, I do tell our volunteers, hey, he does exploration of his private parts, or if it's a female teen, hey, she may be on her cycle this week because my staff does change diapers. Mm-hmm. And so when I have females who are on their menstrual cycle, we need to know that. And so that communication back and forth between parents or guardians is critical and crucial. And so I would just say the more you can communicate, the more you can give examples to them of what they're trying to avoid, that behavior that we don't want to appear, and then the behaviors that we do and how they can celebrate those behaviors that you want. That's going to make them most successful in that student ministry as they transition.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. So I'm hearing a couple different things here. I'm hearing communicating with parents, I'm hearing communicating with your volunteers, but only the information that needs to be communicated. All right. So we're talking about like some, private issues, but sometimes certain volunteers need to know. And I'm curious, and Kathy can answer this, or Sylvia, or anybody else. Do you have like either social stories for students or language that you provide to your volunteers for dealing with some of the behaviors that we might see during puberty? And I'll just take the example of Bob exploring his private parts during Sunday school. So does anybody have any examples of visuals or social stories or language? Like, do you give, what do you tell your volunteers? Put it that way.
So for me, if I do have a teen male who does explore himself, I'm going to tell the volunteers that. And I always make sure that the parents understand that that's something that we do have to share, because we do have other volunteers in the room. We do have other friends, we call them friends, special friends in the room. And so that has to be shared so that they can watch that. And so obviously, as soon as we see that that's occurring, where the hands are going down the pants or whatever, we redirect immediately. Hey, Bob, come on over here and help me with this, right? Hands on the table. Quick, just short responses of hands on the table, things like that. We really try to train our volunteers never to say no or don't, and none of those negative phrases, but more those positive reinforcements of what do we want them to do, not what we don't want them to do. I think that's proper English grammar, but always what we want them to do.
Yes.
So,
okay. So quick redirection with a task or a whatever. So not the negative, but
correct.
positive option or replacement or whatever.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, always.
I remember a pediatrician telling me, because I'm the mom of 3 boys, there's a time and a place, and the parent can say this is not the time or the place. So all right, let's see. Oh yes, Carrie, and then I'll read from the chat.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I was going to say, Kathy, so many of the things that you're mentioning are applicable to this conversation that we're having specifically, but are so good overarching for what we do and who we support, and families and volunteers. So thank you for reaffirming those things. I'm just curious too to know, does anyone train volunteers? Do you have this as an element of your training that's already existing when you're talking to volunteers? For our church, it's very much a one-on-one situation. I know it's really intrigued to be a part of this today, because I feel like we're very reactive. So as a situation happens, then leaning in and talking to a family, gathering information and talking to a volunteer, but we're not yet proactively having this. Is that something that any of your churches do? Is anyone doing that currently?
Looking around, please unmute and share if you are. Okay.
We have multiple trainings during the year, Carrie. So there are several times throughout the year that we get all of our volunteers and all of our staff together, and we go through different aspects of what's important for our special needs ministry at the church that I'm at. And then, of course, as I'm onboarding more volunteers throughout the year, because we're always onboarding volunteers, right? And we always want volunteers on the bench. There's always those conversations and those meetings where, of course, they need their background check and their ministry safe and all of those things, right? Those check boxes. But then we have them come in and observe. And I partner them with somebody who's already experienced and understands that room or that group, that age group that they happen to be with. And then post that observation hour, I usually get with them again that next week and say, hey, what questions did you have? What did you see that you loved? What did you have concerns about? What scared you in special needs ministry? Let's talk through those. Let's work through those fears. But we're always trying to, at our yearly trainings, actually, we have them about 3 times a year, is come up and always review the general stuff like safety and those kind of things. But we always try to talk about behavior, or we want them to walk away with those trainings, as we say, with a new tool in their tool belt so that they can be a better leader the next time they're in there on that Sunday or Wednesday.
That's
I think
great.
if I can just follow up on that, I think
Yes.
my hesitancy in like so far being proactive and sharing that as an element of our training. We talk about the disabilities, we talk about behavior, those kinds of things, but I think it's such a sensitive conversation, a sensitive topic. Yeah, so I was just curious to know if anyone is proactive in that way, that's an element. So thank you for sharing that, Kathy. And I think being a parent of a now young adult who's going to be 21 in January, I just remind our volunteers and our staff and our families of Andrew didn't get to skip puberty having a disability. Like, he's going to go through that experience. And then in his situation specifically, we have cognitive delay. So he doesn't always understand even. So just being super sensitive and grace-filled and loving, and as honoring in that conversation with families as possible. But yeah, just wondering that line of like being reactive to proactive and how much you share with volunteers when it's not something that happens every service, every weekend. So
Right. And I love you said there were two words or phrases that you use that I love. So grace-filled and honoring. And I think we really need to keep those terms in mind as we're thinking through how we're addressing this in our classrooms. We have some things in the chat. I also wanted to share, as our students move from, kind of elementary age into the teen years, be thinking about what kind of classroom rules you have. And, it perhaps starts to become less appropriate to, like, a lot of times in children's ministry, we're giving hugs and, not snuggling, but you know what I mean? Like, we're closer together, and maybe it's not as appropriate the older the student gets. And so, kind of coming up with some general guidelines, and then making sure that those are communicated. So, like, we keep our hands to ourselves, like that kind of thing. All right, I want to, so Kathy, check out the chat if you're able, and I'll let you and Lily connect. And if you can't, I can help you both later. But I think this was when Sylvia was talking. So we have a question. Can you give an example of a spiritual goal for a young adult or teenager? I think that was part of Sylvia's. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. A spiritual formation goal would just to demonstrate an awareness of who Jesus is and how you sense him and his presence in your life. We had one young guy who was nonverbal, and he demonstrated to us because he was very artistic. He could, songs that we were like, well, when did he hear that song? Because it would be like a 1950s song, that he was able to depict what was going on in the song. And one Sunday, he drew our whole service. There was a choir in the background. Pastor was up preaching. The audience you could see them praising and worshiping God. The band was playing the whole story, and he had never actually articulated that. So we asked parents, what is it that you would like to see happening with your child? Not just the attend to the lesson, but where are you in, where's the child? Where would you like to have the child go in terms of accepting Christ, following it up with baptism, and becoming an active part of the church service? So that I will do a social story. I'll walk them through. We have pictures of death, burial, and resurrection that we use to support them in understanding that whole process.
Wow, that is, I would love to see that picture. So this reminds me of, and I'm saying it out loud so that we include it in the show notes so you can go back and check these out. But there's a podcast episode, and Sandra Peoples, one of our co-hosts, did it on individualized spiritual plans, ISPs. So we will link that in the show notes when we post this. And And I just think it's such a great reminder to everyone that everyone communicates differently, and what an awesome demonstration of that. So that's very cool. Thank you for sharing, Sylvia. And Catherine and yay, Catherine's here. Hello, Catherine. So she just included the link in the chat, but we will post that in the show notes. All right, what else? Catherine, you missed some good discussion, but we'll catch you up later. Allison.
Hi there, sorry for the delay. I had technical difficulties. That always means I'm supposed to be here. Yeah, this has been something I've been struggling with for a while. Of just sort of how it's encouraging to hear you talking and thinking, okay, so I'm already doing that. I'm having the communication. What I've been having recently is lots of parents coming to me saying, how do we educate ourselves on what's going on? How do we then walk our child through what's going on? And I was just curious to see if any of you had any resources around that, or what you were using. Interestingly, between the last Zoom and this Zoom, I've been able to chat with some colleagues who are actually running the Preston Sprinkles Christian Sexuality course at our church, and they're doing that with our high school parents to then do it with the high schoolers. But what's been good is I've said to the person who's leading it and facilitating it, can you now look at it through a lens of a parent who has special needs, and we're going to be able to do an adaptation of that for that group separately, and then have the conversation of what would you like to take from this, what's appropriate for. We have a lot of 16, 17-year-old nonverbal children, and it's how do we share that information, how we, like you say, I love that, the grace-filled and honoring for what they need, without just saying la la la, no, they're not going to go through this.
Right,
but
right.
Also not overwhelming everybody with more information than they need on top of everything else. So yeah.
Well, I love that you've had these conversations with your church. I mean, like, that's so cool.
Right. It spurred me on.
Yes, yes. Yes, so the idea share conversation that I was mentioning that prompted this one, yeah, now it's coming back to me. Yes. I'm going to share a resource. I have not checked this out at all, but and is Claire on this call? Doesn't look like it. So so a professor from University of Notre Dame reached out via email. So they do so she works for an institute at Notre Dame. They partner with the National Catholic Partnership on Disability, and they've developed a series of seminars addressing human sexuality education for the parents, teachers, and ministers of young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I thought that was pretty cool. So they have kind of tested out the content. They put together a course, and it is called The Body and Beyond: Human Sexuality for Young People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities from a Catholic Perspective. So it's actually, they have a new class starting later this month and one in January. So we'll share the links to this so that you can check it out if you're interested in the show notes. We'll do that. Oh, and she also shared that a colleague of hers who's a psychologist and a Catholic deacon, Dr. Larry Sutton, has created a curriculum that might be helpful. It's called Healthy Relationships. So again, I haven't checked, I mean, I literally just got this email, so I haven't checked it out, but I'll share that in there. And Catherine, if you have time to look it up, Healthy Relationships by Dr. Larry Sutton. Thank you. Anybody else have resources? All right, I was kind of hoping that one of our colleagues from Ability Ministry would be on here, because I'm fairly certain that they have something along these lines. So that's abilityministry.com, but I don't know for sure if they do. In the chat, Catherine has shared not just the podcast episode, but has shared that book that I just talked about. Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Catherine, would you mind sharing about the webinar? The one, do you know which one I'm talking about? The good touch, bad touch.
Yes, so we did a webinar with Sheila Sullivan and Gail Averett a couple of years ago, and I can drop the link for that too. But I mean, they talked about a lot of this kind of stuff and how it, practical tips for ministry leaders on dealing with that, not only for kids, but for people, who are adults who have intellectual disabilities, just, helping them understand what's appropriate or not in the church setting.
And I think giving some like clear language to use, which I think is really helpful.
Yes. Yeah. And they were very upfront about how, this is just a normal thing that is encountered in, ministry for individuals with intellectual disabilities.
And thank you, Carrie, for sharing in the chat. I knew Ability Ministry would come through. So she shared a link to how to tackle inappropriate sexual behavior in your disability ministry. So that's, even without looking at it, I can guarantee you that that is a good resource for you. Anyone else? I feel like we've had some really good resources shared today. Carrie.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute there. And just looking at that post really quick that Ryan put together, he's also got a curriculum series.
I knew it.
More Than Friends.
Mm-hmm.
Talks about, I'm just kind of glancing through it, looks at romantic relationships and answers some difficult questions you may not be sure about how to best approach.
Webinar.
Yeah, so that's I knew Ability Ministry had something. So yeah, and that can be because I know like just the whole like romantic relationships, like that's a whole nother thing to tackle. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm trying to think if we had, like, I know Ryan Wolf from Ability Ministry has, certainly he's discussed this kind of thing before. I'm trying to think if we did we didn't do like a webinar or anything with him on this.
I don't think so.
I think so. Okay. Right. Any other questions or ideas for like visuals that you're using to help in your classrooms? Questions from parents that you're dealing with?
I was going to say at the same time, there's just to remember there's so many facets of this conversation, right? Like, again, coming back to my son who will be 21 in January, he's not yet dating, but in a small group, there's a gal that's interested in him, and she'll reach over and kind of, place her hand on his hand. And we've had to have a conversation with him recently because what he'll do, he doesn't understand what's happening. She'll place her hand on his hand and he'll gently like tap the top of her hand and then push her hand away. I'm like, oh, buddy, like, yeah, she's interested in you. She's trying to show that she's interested, but just doesn't understand that connection. So just a reminder for all of us, there's just so many levels. And as parents, then we're trying to navigate those things, to be able to, things are happening so fast to be able to articulate to ministry leaders.
Right.
We're not really sure even what we need or, how those things go. And then on the other end, being the ministry leader, wanting to support families really well. So there's just so many layers. And not only this conversation specifically, but all the things that we do in disability ministry. So
Right. And it's so helpful to have, you know, people like many here are parents and ministry leaders. And so, you know, you're bringing both perspectives. And I think it's just so, it's so important that we have these conversations, because, you know, anytime we can kind of partner between church and home, you know, and use the same language and I don't know, just kind of help each other navigate through this process, I think is really helpful. Catherine shared in the chat, shared the link to the Good Touch, Bad Touch webinar. It was excellent. And so I do recommend checking that out. And it may be a resource that you want to share with parents or volunteers. Anybody else? Yes, Allison.
Okay, this is just a little sidebar, but it was just one of those moments where so in my research of this, I was like, okay, so I wonder what, like, you know, is actually going on in somebody's body. So I Googled it. I promise I went to credible sources, definitely medical, and something to do with which I didn't know for young men is sometimes growing pains. Particularly legs. Well, fast forward to literally 24 hours later, I'm on a Zoom call with my support group for my moms. And one of them is saying, I can't understand what's going on with my son at the moment. We're putting him on the bus and there's just tears coming down and we don't know what's going on. And I said, well, I've just been reading. No, sorry, I didn't say that. One of the other moms said, well, we found out my son, who is wheelchair bound, was actually experiencing some growing pains. And I said, I've just been reading about that. and it then put her in touch with being able to reach out to her pediatrician and say, is this something that's happening? Because this poor child, nonverbal, was just crying on a daily bus ride of 45 minutes in each direction. And I was just like, if I hadn't had this webinar to come to, I wouldn't have been looking it up. So
I love that. I love how God works that way. That's very cool.
There we go.
But again, like that's just a perfect example of like having these conversations is going to be helpful for, you know, we don't even know who all it's going to help. So that's great. All right, I'm giving everybody another couple seconds if you want to unmute and share anything or ask a question. All right, does anybody have anything that they have a takeaway or they have a next step or like, this is something I'm going to do, this is a conversation I'm going to have? Does anybody want to share anything along those lines?
Well, it definitely reminds me that I need to do another social story. And it's going to take some thinking through, though, because as we've said about the sensitivity and it would be a matter of walking with some parents that I know who have the question about what would they like to see, how could they support this whole agenda, not just for themselves, but for someone else, because I use a lot of social story things for a lot of things that we do, because even though we're dealing with a lot of individuals who are on the autism spectrum, that seems to be their biggest problem, the executive functioning and how they navigate through all of the things and demands that are being made in school and all of those things. So, and I'm a visual learner, so telling me stuff doesn't make any sense to me until I can get that visual picture in my head. And I tell the participants in our ministry, this is the reason why we're in the ministry, is because we have so many things that we can share, because we have so many disabilities ourselves that it makes it easy to work with the individuals that we work with. And it's easy to share with the parents that we need to share with.
Yeah. Well, Sylvia, I think you're very smart to do, you know, hit the visual learner, like hit all the different ways of learning. And I think having a social story is a great way to do that. So I think, like, for me today, taking some of these things into account, like, being able to have these conversations with parents or share a social story. But I'm just going to keep holding those two, the grace-filled and honoring. I think those are just such important concepts to keep in mind as we're having these conversations with our volunteers, with our parents, with students, that we're, choosing language that's honoring, that we are filled with grace as we are dealing with situations. So that's my big takeaway. So, well, thank you, everybody. Just a reminder, we do these discussions on the third Wednesday of each month, not in December, but every other month. And we also have the idea share on the first Monday of each month, and that's just an open discussion. So make sure that you check out keyministry.org/DATC 2024 for the latest information on disability in the church, which is happening May 1st through 3rd, 2024 in Orlando, Florida. So thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time.